Hello and welcome to Bangalore International Centre's very own podcast, BIC Talks. Bangalore International Centre is a platform for informed conversations, exchange of ideas, and a space for arts and culture. BIC Talks brings the essence of all that the physical space stands for and more to your doorstep.
What is the role of religion in your life today? Do you commune with the divine through rituals? Or is it a comforting routine, going to church or temple once a week or once a month? In an attempt to understand the idea of faith, Shoba Narayan chooses its most fundamental aspect, which is food. In this conversation on Shoba's book, Mani Rao and Shoba Narayan explore this amalgamation of faith and food and hope to find a way to understand the more existential aspects of culture and history in India. This session is an edited extract from a discussion at the Bangalore Literature Festival 2020. And with that, over to Mani and Shoba.
Shoba, I'm really delighted to be here again with you. In fact, the last time we were talking about my book when we were at BIC, and this time, so happy to see this. I'd like to make a couple of connections first for the audience. I find that your writing is very versatile because you're drawing from all your areas of expertise in culture. I've also had the pleasure of being with you on Sanskrit podcast, where we talked about Kalidasa. I know that you're interested in temples, in dance, in traveling, etc. And now you seem to have, even though you did the Monsoon Diaries before, which also has recipes, but this seems to integrate so many different of your interests together. For the benefit of the audience, could you maybe go into the background of how you decided to write this book? What inspired it? Did you just recollect some of your travels because you've traveled widely? Or did you specifically go to these individual places to choose what you write about? I mean, fill us in on the background, please. Yeah.
So after Monsoon Diary was published, I was living in New York then, and a very elegant young editor called Kamini Mahadevan visited me. We were at a coffee shop in Manhattan.
What publisher is this?
She worked at that time for Penguin.
Okay.
And Kamini took me out for a coffee and said, I have read Monsoon Diary. Why don't you write a book called Sacred Food? And it would be about prasadams, and you would visit temples and write about it. And we both got really excited and made up a list. And then life happened. I moved to Singapore and then to India. Kamini moved around too, and this was forgotten.
How many years back is this?
This was 2003. So
a long time
ago, 17 years ago. So I never forgot it. And after I moved to India, we both discovered that the Sacred Food is already, as a book exists, the title exists. So then I was working for Mint and I pitched my editor there, Sukumar, at that time. And I said, why don't I do this? I go to various temples, but I wanted to expand it beyond Hindu temples. And at the same time, not be gratuitous and choose temples where there's no connection with food. And so Sukumar agreed at Mint. And so I started writing. That's how it started. And then this book began with the Mint and then grew a little bit more. So for this particular book, I did more research than would be allowed even in long form journalism. So 17 years after the first encounter in Manhattan is when they say things take their own shape. And so Food and Faith is a title I came up with because the connection between food and faith, regardless of whether you're Parsi or Christian or Jain or Hindu or Muslim, is both intimate and powerful.
It's a riveting title. I mean, the very concept has got so much of scope. Did you take the germ of articles from what you were writing for the Mint and then expanded on them and reconceptualized it?
Yes,
added some chapters?
Yes.
Before we go into all the various aspects of your book, could you tell us a little bit about sort of like the lay of the land, what you restricted yourself to India?
Yes, I restricted myself to India.
And so these are destinations like what's your north, south, west, east? Just give us a topography.
Yeah. So sadly for me, because I'm a bird watcher and I love the Northeast, I couldn't go to the Northeast. I wanted to go to Kamakya, but I couldn't go. And happily,
what's the food in Kamakya?
There isn't.
Okay.
So there was no obvious choice. It was more the garment that was
exactly.
But happily for me, the first review of this came out in Morung Times, which is a Nagaland-based newspaper. So the Northeast is a very obvious exception, or they didn't make it.
But mind you, I'm sure somebody is going to respond to this and say, hey, you don't know about the food in the Northeast.
Correct.
So you're going to have to write a sequel
to it, yes.
Okay,
and Mani, knowing your background, Tirupati Laddu didn't make it. And we can talk about that. I wanted to do East, West, North and South. But after that, it really became an exercise in being called. So the Latin root of the word vocation is vocal and calling. And I think the same thing applied to this book, where I went to Madurai to write about Madurai Meenakshi temple and say, is there any prasadam that I can write about? But instead of writing about Madurai Meenakshi, I went to Alagar Kovil, which is about an hour outside Madurai, and wrote about this fabulous dosai, which is savory prasadam, unlike the sweet prasadams that are found everywhere.
So Alagar is the name of
Alagar means literally the handsome Lord.
Okay.
And he is the Vishnu. So I thought, what a sort of, this Lord has bravado and no modesty calling himself Alagar. But it turns out the Lord's name comes from that Malai, which is called Alagar Malai. So this is the kind of things that the questions I ask in the book is the characters who happen to be gods with a little bit of irreverence. And I ask these questions and I'm like, oh, the handsome Lord of the universe. And I use a little bit of irony. I ask questions that are uncomfortable both to me and the devout, without trying not to cross the line. So I went to Madurai, where Parani Panchamridam, at least in South India, is huge. And I got 100 orders before I even got on the train. And Parani Panchamridam was a bit of an anticlimax, because in the early days, apparently they would stamp on it. They would get this Malavarapuram, which is local to that hill. And then it was 5 ingredients, Panchamritam. Yeah. So it would be cane sugar, locally grown, Kalkanda, which is I don't know the English word for it. It is rock candy.
Yeah.
And then there's bananas. There is teen or honey, ghee, of course, in everything.
So Shoba, I'm going to go deeper into the food in a minute.
Okay.
Just for the sake of the audience, I just want to go through like TOC first, like table of contents. That's why I was saying you went to Madurai, you went to Udupi, Kashi, Ajmer, Parani, Mumbai, Madurai, Jaipur, Goa
for Christmas.
Okay. Thiruvananthapuram, Amritsar, Puri, and the Kumbh Mela, which of course changes, or is always Allahabad.
No, I went to Haridwar, but as you know, it changed.
Okay. Kerala, Patan.
Lalitapura. Mathura.
Okay. So that's a lot of different places, right?
Yeah.
And you ventured out from Bangalore.
All from Bangalore.
You went to a place, came back.
Yeah.
And you went to another place, came back.
Yeah.
Wrote memoir style.
Yeah. Took
so
photographs.
The genre is like memoir, your travel, memoir, plus research, etc.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, exactly that.
Okay.
So it's a memoir about faith and food. It's a questioning, skeptical Hindu who writes about faith and the transformation that happens through the narrative about whether it's for me. Is Hinduism for me?
Very interesting way of describing. And to complicate that bit, I remember you called yourself a skeptical seeker. There's kind of like a contradiction of a skeptical seeker.
Yeah.
And actually skeptical seeker on a pilgrimage.
Yes.
Is what you say. And what I noticed about the book is that she writes about a topic, critiquing some aspects of it sometimes that she's uncomfortable with, and then deals with it, rationalizes it almost. It almost felt for me like a conversation or a back and forth argument between tradition and modernity sometimes, or like a reconciling to some of the problems. Like, for example, in Udupi, you've talked about your discomfort about how the first floor feeds Brahmins, and you had a problem going up there.
They're all supposed to be equal in the eyes of God.
So how did you reconcile these problems? And maybe could you tell us a little bit about your conflict at the core of this whole discussion. How did you resolve it? What is your position in the matter?
I think there's a quote that I love from Carl Jung. I'm a psychology student, which if your feet are barefoot on the ground, how can you forget the earth? So I'll leave you with that thought. The other thought is there's a book by a Romanian scholar called Mircea Eliade, who is in your realm, Mani, and he wrote a book called The Sacred and the Profane. Now, I've been to Egypt. I've been to Greece. I've been to China. These are all ancient civilizations. But nowhere do you find Osiris walking on the streets. Nowhere is the Nile venerated like the Ganga is venerated. Egyptians had a magnificent imagination. They built the pyramids. They had a connection between ancestors, the spirit gods. They had female goddesses. They had everything that we had in India, Hinduism had in India, but they've given that up. So now you go to Egypt, it seems like a shell of a civilization. Same thing with Greece. Greek myths are the foundational myths of Western philosophy and culture. But I have not been to Greece, but there you don't see Athena or Zeus walking the streets.
See, that whole civilization turned with Plato and Socrates and
Correct.
so on. But also when Eliade talks about the sacred and the profane, that kind of distinction we don't really see in India.
Correct. That's what I was coming to
Yeah.
say. So what fascinated me about the way I could wrap my head around this project was to say, India is special because here still you have gods on the streets. Here you still have people who are communing with their faith in a way with reverence, with belief, and they are getting something out of it in a way that you don't see, certainly not in China, which is as magnificent a civilization as the Indus Valley. So regardless of what you feel about the hypocrisy of any religion, I think faith gives you transcendence. And I think in order to experience the transcendence that today's Californians are accessing through legal cannabis, you see that in India. In Bangalore, in Shivaji Nagar, I attended a ritual to the goddess Angala Parameshwari, where a man dresses as a woman and says the goddess comes into him. He carries a kodam. They walk through Shivaji Nagar, collect from every merchant, Hindu, Christian, Muslim. In the end, there is a fire walking ceremony, and then he eats handfuls of meat. Now, they are all in a state of transcendence. And I think what I discovered through all of this, whether it is the Qawwali in Ajmer, whether it is the millions of people who don't see the dirt in the Ganga and dip themselves into it, it is an extraordinary act of imagination and belief.
Now, is this the person talking after writing the book or the person talking before writing the book? After. Because this doesn't match with the skeptical seeker at all.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've just been won over by this. And I remember when I was reading some of the chapters, and part of my amazement was how you had the questioning from your rational mind. At the same time, you were very obedient to the norms because you talk about how your mother tells you to do this and you do that, etc. You were following the convention.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you have a questioning,
Mm-hmm.
but also actually perhaps just open-hearted.
Thank you.
And you talk about that in the Kashi chapter about how you think it opened your heart.
Mm.
It seems like this whole journey of research seems to have actually affected you personally.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're perhaps not a skeptical seeker anymore, do you think?
I wish I could attain the bhavana or the imagination that the faithful have. But I certainly see the value of puja. So in Haridwar, there is a Swamiji who has a big ashram, the biggest in Haridwar. And I said, why are you doing puja? He said, if you touch leaves, if you touch flowers, if you touch and bow to the tree, if you touch the earth, it's a way of connecting with nature that we have lost, frankly. And I think every old religion that persists today still has that. We think in symbols. Most of us, the human mind does not think in words. If we think in symbols, we think with flights of imagination. And the genius of every religion that survives is they have made blood into wine, or they have made in the Sikh faith where a book is worshipped and where you offer food in a giant langar to people as if they are God. So they have connected the sacred and the profane in a way that people like me could learn from. I'm not there yet, but I'm not a skeptic anymore. I'm a seeker. Now I'm a seeker.
Do you think that food offers pathways into it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's the most fundamental pathway, not to God, I wouldn't say. I mean, I think the senses are a pathway to God.
Okay.
And I was just thinking about it because I was listening. There's a chapter on Kerala where I have a video that I took of the Chenda drums. And you see that in the Trishur Puram, you see that in the Ambalappuzha temple that I visited. And when the payasam is brought out, the conch is blown and the drums are beaten. And then there's that kinnaram that they... And I'm thinking, this is like a modern day discotheque where people go and mindlessly we go in and there's the thumping drums and we dance and we try to lose ourselves. Whereas this is more rooted in our culture. And I'd like my daughter to experience that and say, hey, guess what? Trishur Puram is like a discotheque. It is a way for you to lose yourself, lose your mind and connect with some greater, we call it divinity, but it's enough to lose yourself.
It's fascinating how you took the thought from food back to the sensory engagement. I think perhaps last week sometimes I was reading something where, the famous Annam Brahma, the equation between the two.
He's called Anna Brahma because he feeds, and the Madhvacharya's sect began there.
So in this discussion, it was talking about how we are so careful about what we ingest because that influences our mind and our body, etc. But actually what we ingest is everything through the senses as well. So the annam is not just in the food, rather the whole world is food because we consume everything that we contact. So therefore, that we have to be careful about what we are exposing ourselves to, the movies we watch, or it depends. If you want to create a disciplined pathway through a chosen set of framework.
Yes.
So that was an interesting concept. So to see everything as food.
As nourishment.
As nourishment, because it nurtures us and that's part of what we take in. Right?
And I think we don't have any other way of reaching God. We have our senses.
Yeah.
And then, of course, every faith, whether it's Buddhism, they talk about retreat from the senses. But for a beginning seeker like myself, the senses are where it's at. That's how you access the faith. In the beginning, you listen to music, you eat the food, you touch the God, you chant the mantra.
So, what has always impressed me is that the prasadams are all sweet, and the sweetness of faith, of love for the divine, we always associate that with sweetness.
Whether it's the Kesariya bath of Ajmer or the halwa which the Bene Israelis make for Rosh Hashanah or Panchamritam.
What's your favorite prasadam?
So I was going to say the Aragar Kovil Adai is an exception because they use the indigenous urad dal, which is the Vigna Mungo, the black one that we use. And then they have rice and then they deep fry it in ghee. And it's delicious.
Then no jaggery, no sweet, nothing.
No, it is made with not green chilies because it's not indigenous, with pepper and ginger and they
that's
grind
prasadam.
That is the prasadam for this handsome Lord of the universe. Yeah.
I guess the handsome Lord is sweet enough. So
yeah, of course there is the puliyodare, which is the tamarind rice and the curd rice. All of that goes. You go to Aragar Kovil to have the dosa.
Did you find that they had a sense of consciousness? The people making these different dishes, or did they had a sense of consciousness about sattvic food or Ayurvedic principles or probiotics or anything? Do you think?
So the actual place where this vada is made or the panchamritam is made, in Parni now the panchamritam is made by machines, sadly, because they said if we touch it, nobody's going to take it. Go in there and there's it's almost like a wine cellar. You have these giant cylinders and it mixes all by itself. No hand is touched. But the women bottle it, and every place where the prasadam was made, and I visited every place, first of all, there's a shanti. There is a peacefulness. There is belief that they are in service to God. There is a humility that comes from that. So there is a part of being something larger than yourself. Even the Aragar Kovil, where it's still pounded by hand, there would be women, from the village, normal women, they would wear malipu on their hair. They would be sitting on the floor and spreading all the stuff. But
they are engaged in a sacred activity. Isn't Puri a major production of this sort, isn't it? That's also in your book, right?
Yeah. So they say that Vishnu has a bath in Rameshwaram, goes to Puri, has his food, goes to meditate in Badrinath, and then sleeps in Dwaraka. So those are the route that he takes. So Jagannath Puri was an amazing experience.
But they make tons of prasadam of so many number of dishes, and
there are 500 cooks. And they belong to a caste called the Swaras, and they are tribals.
Okay.
And Puri has Brahmin priests.
Okay.
The Kshatriya warriors are the ones who do everything else except the cooking. The cooking is done by the Swaras to this day. And I couldn't enter. I had to stand in the Puri library across the street.
Because you're a woman?
And then look through binoculars.
Is it because
you're a woman, and also outsiders are not allowed.
Okay.
And the feeling is that the goddess Bimla Devi, who is more ancient than Puri, actually cooks the food. So one of the cooks told me, if I think even for a moment that I am making this, even though he is, my pots will shatter. They believe Bimla Devi is making it for her husband. And so they say that when you carry
through which
they are instruments.
Yeah.
But isn't that what all creative work is that there's this great TED talk by Elizabeth Gilbert where they say genius comes through you. In this case, they all believe divinity comes through them, that they are vessels.
And it's offered first to the divine.
Yes.
And then they eat the remnants.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in Puri, one thing which you alluded to, Mani, which I felt was, you look at photographs of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and I didn't grow up with him because in South India, he's not very popular. And he is ecstatic as he sings and dances. Now, today's generation, my kids believe religion is solemn. It's tense because you do puja at home, everybody gets tense. But then you go to these temples like the Jaipur temple, you watch Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they are dancing and singing. And somehow today with our prudishness, we have removed all of that from faith and made it into ritual. Whereas in Puri, I witnessed dance and song as a way to access the divine. And same thing in Jaipur, where there was a congregation of people.
Song and dance and food.
Song and dance and food. Jaipur, it was a big spread, about the size of this dais. They had varieties of sweets to Govind Dev Ji. And the whole congregation was like, they had their hands up like in a rock concert, and they were all dancing. But the movements are Indian. You could see Odissi and Bharatanatyam in that. So I think that the joyousness of faith also was revealed to me in this journey in Ajmer, for one, in Puri, in Jaipur, not so much in the South Indian temples, where it was very solemn and stuff.
I have to tell you that many years ago, somebody said to me that, look, I know that you're just waiting for the whole aarti to be finished and to get the prasad.
Aren't we all?
And I was like, yeah. That's where I was at. Right?
Yeah.
Because and you know what? So what? At least that's still one step forward.
Yeah.
And there is joy in that also.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on the other hand, I remember thinking when somebody said, won't you have prasad and go? And I was like, is that all they're going to give me?
Yeah.
But what they mean is, won't you eat and go?
Yeah.
Because all food is prasadam.
Yes.
Everything you eat is prasadam because you offered it to the divine.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. But you've seen this concept working beyond Hinduism, right? Because your destinations are not all Hindu. Would you talk a little bit about that? Your choices maybe? What have you covered in this book?
Yeah. Christianity was the hardest, and Parsi, the Zoroastrian faith, I didn't even go, I didn't touch. Christianity does not have this whole notion of prasadam or naivedyam, even though the Shivajinagar church, they do the feast of St. Mary, and I visited. They call it a feast, but if you talk to the Christians, many of whom I know from the area, they'll say it's not prasadam, ma. It's a feast.
But isn't it the same concept, because grace is said before meals? And
that is on a daily basis, yes, of course.
Yeah, and that's the equivalent of Ramarpanam, isn't it?
Correct. That is exactly correct. Goa, I went because years ago when I interviewed the amazing cartoonist Mario Miranda, he said, Portuguese is my mother tongue. I'm Christian. But to this day, we give 4 sacks of rice to the goddess because our family made a promise to that. So the syncretic culture, and then the late great fashion designer Wendell Rodrigues was a friend of mine. He took me through his village, and he said Goa is a place where the spirits come down to earth and they talk to us. So I was interested in the spirit universe. I was interested in this whole notion of ancestral promise that are being kept to this day, and that happens. So in the chapter on Christianity, it is not so much about sacred food because that would be gratuitous. It was more about this whole notion of how you keep past promises and how you interact with the spirit world in a way that you can't do in Bangalore, for example. So that was that. Jainism and Zoroastrianism are strong.
What destination was the Jainism?
No, I didn't.
Exploration? No. Okay.
But I did, the Ajmer Dargah was for the Kesaria bath. And I speak very
And that's savory, isn't it?
No, it is sweet.
Sweet.
The same, but broken wheat. It's a halwa type thing, and they stir it. So Ajmer, I had never visited. I visited it. And what I remember about the Dargah is the scent of the Desi Gulab everywhere, because the faithful take that in little platters. And it is so beautiful. I mean, and again, every place of worship, just like everywhere else, there's a hush. Your heart rate goes down, and then everybody's quiet, and then you go in. And again, I begin the Parani chapter by saying Carnegie Hall has no competition with a Hindu temple. But that's the same whether it is the Harmandir Sahib in Amritsar or the Ajmer. There is a hush, and just before you enter the final sanctum sanctorum, there's like one padabadapur, or there is everything it rises up. So the same with Ajmer, and the Kesaria bath is there, and people. It's in these giant cauldrons, and you see the hopes and wishes of the devotees and the prayer flags. Some people, what they string, what they put. You see that in Parni also on the trees. People will hang a wooden cradle, and I am not there yet. I cannot go there and hang a food and faith book and say, "May something fantastic happen." In order to do that, you have to have a level of. I don't think I have hubris, but you have to have a subjugation of the ego that I saw everywhere. And the rational mind has to stop asking questions. The rational mind has to stop seeing the hypocrisies and just submit.
But you sure seem on the way, Shoba.
I'm on the way.
I have to say that when I was going through your book, first, as a person who was going to be in conversation with you, I started looking, okay, let's see which are the chapters that are Hindu and which are the chapters that are not, and how syncretic is it, how much multi-faith is it. And then as I read parts of it, I found that actually you're interested in the inner vision, you're interested in inner truth. It's not really so much about doctrine and about any particular name. It's something deeper that seems to attract you. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah. So the Dalai Lama interviewed, or in the Bene Israel chapter where I write about the Jews of Mumbai, there's a section where the Jews come from America to meet the Dalai Lama, and they talk about the exoteric aspect of the religion and the esoteric aspect, and every old faith. So Islam has Sufism. Judaism has a Kabbalah, Hinduism has Tantra. I don't know the word, the thing for Christianity, but that has been written about.
Gnosticism.
Yes. So the Dalai Lama, they came to ask the Dalai Lama, the Jews, how can we marry the exoteric, the outer and the inner? Instead, the Dalai Lama asked them, how have you managed to preserve Judaism even though you've been wandering the earth for 2,000 years? And it was very poignant because he was exiled from Tibet and in Dharamshala at that time. So that chapter is more about identity, faith as identity. And that's a very troubling concept, as you know, in India today. Do you choose your faith or do you choose your nation? What is your identity? And
you choose your food.
Yes, I chose the food.
Yeah. Do you think you could read a couple of excerpts for us?
Sure,
maybe
with
something
pleasure.
that has given you particular delight.
With pleasure. So you had told me, and I have taken one very detailed as in it's about the food. And then the other one is about the takeaway. When I began this journey, it seemed like a fairly straightforward exercise. Travel to temples, eat good food, make peace with your faith, repeat. What I hadn't bargained for was how my faith would touch me, the questions it would raise and answer. Hinduism, much like every other old faith, is a vast, magnificent religion, deep, mysterious, compassionate, and complex. These pilgrimages reintroduced me to my faith and offered me beneficial practices. Religion is an inheritance and a choice, I think, for all of us today. I was born a Hindu and I like the religion enough not to choose another. But being a proud Hindu is something I wriggle away from. In Goa, a Hindu member of parliament told me that he was a Hindu within the confines of his home, but outside he was an Indian first and a Hindu last. That sounds about right to me. When I traveled across India, I discovered the power of faith, but also its prejudices. Religion is one measure of identity, but it cannot be the only one, particularly in a land where several of the world's major religions thrive. No matter what our faith, we need to reach beyond religious divides and embrace our common humanity. To me, that is the hope and pleasure of living in a pluralistic society like India. So that's where I am. And the specificity is I took it out of Jagannath Puri. Mm-hmm. You cannot enter the kitchens of the Jagannath Puri temple, but you can see a miniature version of this in the Ananta Vasudev temple in Bhubaneswar. This jewel of a temple sits near a beautiful tank, and inside several small kitchens prepare food every day using local humble ingredients. Local rice, tuar dal, yellow pumpkin, brinjal, yam, and other indigenous vegetables cooked over wood fire served in the eating section. It's easy to be flippant or cynical about temple food. The same list of dishes cooked in the same way over centuries, feeding masses of people via the Lord. What other virtue does a prasadam have? An important one has to do with the preservation of indigenous seed varieties. At the Jagannath temple, for example, the offering is made with green paddy. For green paddy to be available through the year, specific seed varieties have to ripen at different times that must be grown around the temple. At the very least, this promotes biodiversity. India used to have 1 lakh varieties of rice. Today, most of us eat Sona Masuri or Basmati. Temple kitchens specifically choose local and indigenous variety of rice such as matta, nyavara, red rice, parba oil rice. Today, local and seasonal dining is the buzzword, particularly with restaurants like Noma in Copenhagen, and which make a virtue of foraging. But you know what? Our society used to do that. On Amavasya or New Moon Day, elderly South Indians only eat indigenous vegetables, and then they fast on Ekadashi and break their fast with a very particular kirai called Agatik kirai, which is supposed to detoxify you. So then I go on my mother told me there was one amla fruit called Vidyaramba Nellika, which comes in a particular time, which is Vijayadashmi. And it came during the season where there were a lot of fog and mist and rain, and it kept away the sniffles. In India, mangoes come in the hot season. And if you look at Ayurveda, they say mangoes are hot food. And I asked my dad, why is hot food coming in the hot season? Shouldn't mango's intrinsic quality be cool? He says, Ushnena Ushnam Shanti, which means you eat hot food, you sweat, and then it calms you down. So this type of details, the choice of vegetables. So Jagannath Puri, you go to food, this Chappan Bhog, there are so many varieties. It is food for the soul. It is not Broy or Taj West End or whatever. But the weird part is you go into restaurant kitchens, and at least in Manhattan, when I used to write about food, the cooks would be swearing at each other, and it was anything except peace. Whereas you go into temple kitchens and it is peaceful. So then you have to ask yourself, does the temperament of the cook translate to the food? And the sacred food certainly does, because I think it affects not your taste buds, but your soul. That's what I found out.
Okay. Very optimistic, and hopefully it's actually not optimistic, but realistic. Thank you for that.
Thank you for listening in till the end. Please share this episode with a friend on social media, WhatsApp, or anywhere else. It would mean the world to us. And in case you're listening via iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and a review. Subscribe to BIC Talks on email or your favorite podcast app, and don't miss out on future episodes. This episode of BIC Talks has Gaurav Krishna as our sound engineer, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Lekha Naidu. And the accompanying episode artwork was made by Chandni Venkataraman.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BIC Talks. This podcast can be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org, as well as on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Tune in for new episodes every week, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages to stay informed on our latest updates.